So it is Mother's Day, and I've entitled the message for today, Everyday Valor, Crowning Virtue. Every year, pastors feel pressure to bring a heartfelt, thoughtful Mother's Day message. Sometimes they miss it for whatever reason. It's not intentional, but in an effort to elevate women and by giving biblical examples of amazing women who do amazing things with amazing qualities. The thought is to encourage ladies, but the result sometimes, maybe even most of the time, is really just more pressure. And who really needs more pressure, right? Nobody does. And I know this, and yet I was drawn repeatedly. I tried to get away from it, but I was drawn repeatedly to Proverbs 31. That's my text for today. What some people call a picture of the ideal woman. No pressure, right? No pressure. Not today. Now, I don't want to take the usual approach, painting the picture of womanhood and of motherhood as something that is just far beyond any mortal person's reach, to where you might say to yourself, who in the world is like this? I don't know anybody like this. And you don't look over to your husband and say, and don't, by the way, hold your breath, because it's not happening. So what I've done is I've tried to step outside myself, and I've chosen as my primary sources, actually, I wrote that before I realized that all of my sources today are women. I've chosen to use what women have said, what women have done, their stories, to actually paint the picture of how they feel about this Proverbs 31 woman and some conclusions that they came to, how they relate to all of this. So are you familiar, let me ask you that, are you familiar with the woman of Proverbs 31? Why don't you turn there and we're going to read about her, and that's where we'll start. Proverbs chapter 31. And if you're not already there, but you're going there, this will work. Before we get to verse 10, which is really where we're going to begin our reading today, let me start off by saying that this chapter, beginning in verse 1, makes this claim. The sayings of King Lemuel, which some people believe is Solomon, but there's no real evidence, there's no credible evidence of that. The sayings of King Lemuel, an inspired utterance his mother taught him. And that would be, if it is Solomon, that would be Bathsheba. So put all that aside and just think about this. The words that are forever recorded in God-inspired scriptures concerning the ideal woman actually comes from a mother who's giving advice to her son. And that's the first verses of the chapter go through some other things that the mom wants her son to know. Like, listen, my son, verse 2. Listen, the son of my womb. Listen, my son, and answer to my prayers. Do not spend your strength on women, your vigor on those who ruin kings. She's painting sort of a skeptical picture. Look out, son, because you'll find yourself, if you spend all of your strength chasing the wrong person, you'll spoil your life. And of course, we know that if it was Solomon, apparently he didn't listen to his mom's advice. We want to always listen to our mom's advice, although sometime we fail. So then we get down to verse 10, and we read about this woman. A wife of noble character, who can find? She is worth far more than rubies. Her husband has full confidence in her and lacks nothing value. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. She selects wool and flax and works with eager hands. She is like the merchant ships bringing her food from afar. She gets up while it is still night. She provides food for her family in portions for her female servants. She considers a field and buys it. Out of her earnings, she plants a vineyard. Verse 17, she sets about her work vigorously. Her arms are strong for the task. She sees that her trading is profitable, and her lamp does not go out at night. In her hand she holds the distaff and grasps the spindle with her fingers. She opens her arms to the poor and extends her hands to the needy. When it snows, she has no fear for her household, for all of them are clothed in scarlet. She makes coverings for her bed. She is clothed in fine linen and purple. Her husband is respected at the city gate, where he takes his seat among the elders of the land. She makes linen garments and sells them, and supplies the merchants with sashes. She is clothed with strength and dignity. She can laugh at the days to come. She speaks with wisdom, and faithful instruction is on her tongue. She watches over the affairs of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. Her children arise and call her blessed. Her husband also, he praises her. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. Honor her, for all her hands have done, and let her works bring her praise at the city gate. That, ladies, is a tall order. As I was looking at all of these sources, I realized that it must be true that there is some obsession among women with these ladies who have studied the scriptures and studied this passage, because all they do over and over again is mention Proverbs 31, Proverbs 31. So you're going to hear that in my readings today from these various women. The first woman that I found to quote was actually a priest at a church that has been in a community for 1,000 years. In Britain. It's a Church of England, which is ironic because it says the church was there for 1,000 years, but the Church of England hasn't been around for 1,000 years. So go figure. Anyway, this woman, her name is Briani. She says this: I think there are two ways to look at this passage, especially if you're a woman. Firstly, you can look at it and compare yourself to the woman being described. When I first read this passage, it just made me feel a bit inadequate. I spoke to my mom this week about this sermon. I had this Bible reading at my wedding, and she read it. She confessed to me this week, at the end of the reading, she was tempted to say, "Good luck with that." The other way to look at the passage is to be inspired by the example, not as a to-do list, but as an example to aspire to. Now, while I can agree with this, and I think that you probably can too, at least to some extent, I also know that women scrutinize women. And moms know this well. In your inspiration to aspire to, it can become an unending to-do list that just leaves you frustrated, feeling judged, and less than adequate. Like, in all of your trying, you've somehow failed. And you become your own worst critic. That's bad news in a way, but I have some good news. You're not alone. That's the only good news I have. You're not alone, ladies, in your struggle. Kelly writes about a woman whose name is Rebecca. She says this: Rebecca Montgomery shares her heartache after hearing yet another Mother's Day sermon on Proverbs 31. And the woman therein. This is what Rebecca says, quoted by Kelly. The more I listened, the more depressed I became. If the preacher would have told me that the virtuous woman wore a size 8, I think I would have given up on the spot. I would never measure up. Unless I dressed the kids the night before and stored them in Tupperware, I couldn't get to church on time. Let alone do all that spinning, running a vineyard, and being noble. So it's to people like Rebecca that a popular writer named Rachel responds. Pastors usually mean well. They want to honor women on Mother's Day, so they turn to the biblical passage most associated with femininity, one that culminates with what may be the most cross-stitched Bible verse of all time. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is passing, but a woman who fears the Lord shall be praised. Charm is deceitful, and beauty is fleeting or passing, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. And then Rachel goes on to say this, but for women like me, who grew up thinking of a domestic superheroine of Proverbs 31 as just another impossible standard by which to mark my shortcomings as a woman, the passage can come with some baggage. When you measure your life up, she's saying, to this woman and what you think the expectations are, you come to this text with some baggage because you know in your own mind, because you've become your own worst critic, that it has to come with baggage. You know yourself, you know your shortcomings better than anybody. So this just becomes a measure, and you fall short so often. And then she goes on to say that's because too often we focus on the Proverbs 31 woman and her roles as a way of reducing womanhood to marriage and motherhood and domesticity, when really this passage is about character that transcends both gender and circumstance. It's about everyday valor. And then she goes on to describe that. Rachel continues, our confusion around Proverbs 31, like most misinterpreted Bible passages, centers around the issues related to genre, audience, and language. With that in mind, here are 3 things you might not know, she offers. First, Proverbs 31 is a poem. That's the genre. That's the type of writing that it is. The subject of the 22-line poem found in the last chapter of the book of Proverbs, the woman of noble character, is meant to be a tangible expression of the book's celebrated virtue of wisdom. This is about wisdom. The author is essentially showing us what wisdom looks like in action. And by the way, wisdom is a feminine word, so it's cast in the feminine, and you can trace it all through the book. If you're an astute student looking at the book, you see that a woman is always presented as wisdom throughout, or folly throughout the book. When you come to the end of the book, the woman known as wisdom shows up on the scene, and she is actually a picture of what wisdom looks like in action. You make the connection if you read the whole book. This woman, the woman wisdom, is found in earlier chapters of the book of Proverbs. Now, when we talk about the text itself, it's packed with, she says, hyperbolic, militaristic imagery, and it is. The poem is an acrostic. So the first word of each verse begins with a letter from the Hebrew alphabet in succession. We have 26 letters. They have 22 letters. So there's 22 verses, verse 10 through verse 31. This communicates a sense of totality. You've gone from A to Z in our alphabet. So this communicates a sense of totality as the poet praises the everyday achievements of an upper-class Jewish wife, a woman who keeps her household functioning day and night, buying, trading, investing, planning, sewing, spindling, managing servants, extending charity, providing food for her family, and preparing for each season. Like any good poem, and here's the key, the purpose of this one is to draw attention to the often overlooked glory of the everyday. Women, wouldn't just every now and then you like to get appreciated for everything that you do that so often just goes unnoticed? The poet is simply framing wisdom in the fashion of a woman and saying this is what it looks like in action. She doesn't stop there. As a poem, Proverbs 31 should not be interpreted prescriptively as a job description for all women. It's prescribed to you, in other words. Its purpose is to celebrate wisdom in action, not to instruct women everywhere to get married, have children, and take up the loom. That's the genre. It's a poem. The audience, This is amazing. This will surprise you. The target audience, well, maybe not. The target audience, she says, of Proverbs 31 is men. It's not women, it's men. And we keep preaching it to women. It's supposed to be for men. According to Rachel, I first learned this from my Jewish friend, Ahava, who told me that in her culture, it's not the women who memorize Proverbs 31, but the men. They memorize it, Ahava said, to sing it as a song of praise to the women in their lives. Their wives, their daughters, their sisters, their mothers, and friends. Ahava's husband sings Proverbs 31 to her at every Sabbath meal. Rachel goes on to say, as I did more research, I learned that, indeed, the only instructive language in the poem is directed at the poem's intended male audience. This is what it says, praise her for all her hands have done. Praise her for all her hands have done. Every day, praise her for all the things that she does. You don't see them because you're off doing something else, all wound up in your own world, guys. Take time to remind your wife that you know what she does. Praise her for all her hands have done. And yet, many Christians interpret this passage, she says, prescriptively, as a command to women rather than an ode to women, with the home-based endeavors of the Proverbs 31 woman cast as an ideal lifestyle for all women of faith, no longer presented as a song through which a man offers a woman praise. Proverbs 31 is presented as a task list through which a woman earns it. This, I believe, misses the point of the text entirely. And then she gets down to what she's been working at, the target of where she's heading. She says, number 3, something you may not know about Proverbs 31 and the woman found there. Proverbs 31 celebrates valor. Valor. Ahava repeated, that's her friend, remember, Ahava repeated a finding I discovered in my research, that the first line of Proverbs 31 poem, that's verse 10 now, a virtuous woman who can find, is best translated, a woman of valor who can find. The Hebrew is Eshet Chayil, woman of valor. The male equivalent to Gibor Chayil, a man of valor. To make this fact even more fun, Ahava explained to me that she and her friends cheer one another on with the blessing, celebrating everything from promotions to pregnancies to acts of mercy and justice to battles with cancer with a hearty Eshet Chayil. Think of it as something like, you go, girl. According to Ahava, valor isn't about what you do, but about how you do it. If you are a stay-at-home mom, be a stay-at-home mom of valor. If you're a nurse, be a nurse of valor. If you're a CEO, a pastor, or a barista. If you are rich or poor, single or married, do it all with valor. That's what makes you a Proverbs 31 woman, not creating a life worthy of a Pinterest board. Although it might be, but not necessarily. She follows this by saying, this, I believe, better reflects the original intent of Proverbs 31 and therefore honors Scripture well. And then she goes on in this article that I am drawing from, and she talks about the other Proverbs 31 woman. There's only one other place in the whole Bible where this terminology is used. She's not the only woman in the Bible to receive the high praise of Eshet Chayil, or woman of valor. So did Ruth. Believe it or not, Ruth was a destitute foreigner whose daily work involved gathering, threshing, and winnowing wheat. For most of her story, she is neither a wife nor a mother. Circumstantially, her life looked nothing like the life of the woman depicted in Proverbs 31. Ruth didn't spend her days making clothes for her husband. She had no husband. She was widowed. Ruth's children didn't rise up and call her blessed. She was childless. Ruth didn't spend her days exchanging fine linens with the merchants and keeping an immaculate home. She worked all day in the sun, gleaning leftovers from other people's fields, which was a provision made for the poorest of the poor in Israel. And yet, guess what Boaz says of Ruth before she gets married? Before she has a child, before she becomes a wealthy and influential woman. Ruth 3:11 records these words. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character. The Hebrew that is used there is Eshet, Chayil, a woman of valor. Ruth is identified as a woman of valor, not because she checked off some Proverbs 31 to-do list by getting married, keeping a clean house, and producing children, but because she lived her life with incredible bravery, wisdom, and strength. She lived her life with valor. Now, as great as all that is, and I have to agree with Rachel, I think sometimes that's how a guy wants to look at it, because to me, that has an injection of testosterone in there. I'm looking for some estrogen here, and she gives me this. So I like this stuff. Live like a woman of valor, yeah. But it's not the whole picture. To me, I came to the conclusion that there must be something missing. If the goal is only to live as a woman of valor, it seems like it's all you're doing, but it's not. It isn't the whole picture. From where does this character, this valor, come? If we stop there, we might get the wrong impression. Is this self-driven valor the goal, or is there a greater virtue to which wisdom points? If not, then all we can do is compare. Think about it. If the origin is with you, all you can do is compare what you've done with what somebody else has done. And that never turns out good. Verse 28 says this about the woman. So you'll never measure up. You'll never measure up. Many women do noble things, but you surpass them all. He says of the woman wisdom in the chapter. Ladies, you won't measure up. Don't try. Don't try. There has to be something that wisdom is pointing to here that maybe Rachel missed. At least she missed it in the article. Is there a crowning virtue in the heart of this amazing woman described in wisdom terms in Proverbs 31? In coming to grips with this woman, in coming to grips with her, another writer named Vicky thinks so. Her story goes like this. My first brush with the Proverbs 31 woman occurred during my junior year of college. I was attending a weekly Bible study, and our group leader charged us to read the Proverbs 31 passage so that we could discuss her the following week. I thought, the Proverbs 31 who? The leader seemed shocked with my lack of knowledge regarding this particular Bible character. She explained that this was the gal to emulate when it comes to being a godly wife and mother. I hadn't been raised in a Christian home, so I welcomed any guidance I could get and looked forward to reading the passage. However, the collective sigh from the rest of the young women in the group should have alerted me that a trip into Proverbs 31 should be taken only under the threat of great emotional peril. Later that evening, I opened my Bible to the passage and began reading. It started off simply enough. How hard could this be, this Proverbs 31 stuff? I would soon find out. I continued reading and reading and reading. By the time I got to the verse where this capable wife makes her own bed coverings, I wanted to curl up on my own store-bought comforter and sleep off my depression. Was this woman for real? No wonder she's worth far more than jewels. She's doing the job of 20 people. Did she stay hyped up on a steady stream of 5-hour energy to knock out her to-do list? If this is the template for becoming a godly wife and mother, I was in big trouble. By the time my weekly Bible study rolled around, I compiled a long list of questions to ask my leader. Unfortunately, we never got around to discussing them. My leader and the rest of the girls in the group seemed content to camp out on her domestic to-do list in an attempt to crack the code of what it looked like to be a modern-day Proverbs 31 woman. In the end, we were left with a June Cleaver-like prototype of domestic Leave It to Beaver suburban blistum. Suburban blistum. I'll get it right the second time. June Cleaver. Hey, listen, I like Leave It to Beaver. I don't care what you say. You have to look at Leave It. I think Leave It to Beaver is told, the show, you know the old show, some of you may not, is told from the perspective of the beaver, a kid. This is what life looks like. It's not nearly as complicated as what adults make it. It's very simple. And so often it's black and white. But these women gather for a Bible study, and they're content to sit around and talk about what it looks like to be a modern day Proverbs 31 woman. And the woman that they come up with is somebody that appears like June Cleaver, where everything turns out good in the end. She titles this next section, Married to the Beeve. 1 year later, I was engaged to be married, and June Cleaver was to be my mother-in-law. She made things from scratch. She knew what a colander was and how to use a garlic press. My culinary skills were limited to Kraft macaroni and cheese and frozen corn dogs. She cut coupons out of the newspaper and then actually used them. It should come as no surprise that my husband Keith and I encountered a few domestic hiccups in our first year of marriage. Keith was a real trooper when I tossed his underwear and t-shirts into the washer with a pair of never been washed red sweatpants. Pink may be all the rage today, but it most certainly wasn't chic in the 1980s. However, the lowest moment came when I overheard Keith on the phone one evening asking my mother-in-law how to get the mildew smell out of towels. Oh boy, I earmarked that conversation for a marriage counseling session somewhere down the road. Everything proceeded to go downhill when the kids arrived on the scene. I tried to pull off the domestic image of the home-cooked meal simmering on the stove when Keith walked through the door, but more often than not, I was the one boiling. Blame it on the stress of cooking in a hostile work environment, also known as I have 3 young children who melt down at the dinner hour. After a day filled with wiping little noses, sweeping cereal-strewn floors, and debating with toddlers, the pre-dinner hour was often my tipping point. Maybe I'd missed the scene in which June locked her children, Wally and the Beeve, in a closet while she prepared her signature dish. But I couldn't juggle the roles of mom, homework advisor, chef, and lover all in the same night. Sock it to me, she says. That's her next section. My Proverbs 31 breaking point came at a women's conference I attended many years ago. The theme was, you guessed it, the virtuous woman. I remember being loaded down with guilt as the main speaker defined what qualities constitute a modern-day virtuous woman, touting Proverbs 31 as the foundational passage. I can't recall many of the details, but I do remember that she highlighted the importance of wives sorting their husbands' dress socks by color in their dresser drawers. I'm not making this up, she says. Apparently, sock sorting fell under the umbrella of bringing your husband good, not evil, all the days of her life. She even exhorted us to put the brown socks in the middle, since blue and black socks are often mistaken for one another. If this unknown sock clause was a deal breaker for attaining Proverbs 31 status, I had no choice but to resign on the spot. P31, myth busting, is her next section. At least one good thing came from the sock seminar. It motivated me to dive into Proverbs 31. See, I'm telling you, the women have an obsession with Proverbs 31. She dove into the Proverbs 31 passage to study it on her own. I made a startling discovery. The Proverbs 31 woman was not an actual real woman. All these years I had felt intimidated by this woman, only to discover that she's make-believe. The passage is actually a compilation of virtuous qualities that women should strive to have. Whew, she says. The passage doesn't describe a mild-mannered church lady whose primary purpose is to be a housekeeper and helpmate to her spouse. I'm not knocking those qualities, but I've gotten way off track with the portrayals that limit the Proverbs 31 woman to this role only. Ladies, we know that you do a lot of things. The commentary Bible, and this is the only male that actually is quoted here, and it's a woman quoting the male commentary. She says, the commentary, the Bible Reader's Companion, notes, the noble wife of this chapter supervised a staff of workers, verse 27. She served as buyer for her enterprises, verse 13. She sold what her staff produced, verses 18 through 24. She invested her profits, verse 16. She had the freedom to give help to the needy, verse 20. She was respected for her wisdom and responsibility, verses 14 and 15 and 26 through 31. This picture of the woman's role is a far cry from what many of us have been taught. In Old Testament times, women had the opportunity to use their God-given abilities. Why are these qualities rarely addressed when we hear about this woman? This is no Bible-toting June Cleaver. In fact, and now she comes to what Rachel found. In fact, the Hebrew word for noble character in verse 10 is chayil. She defines it first a little differently. Not necessarily valor, although that is what it means. She says it means a force. This woman is a force. It's also used to describe an army of men. She is a one-woman army. She is virtuous, she is valiant, and she is full of valor. This woman was a force to be reckoned with. Her virtue had nothing to do with her ability to put a home-cooked meal on the table or to get grass stains out of white baseball pants. She was fiercely devoted to God, her husband, and her children. In that order. This is the crowning virtue. At the core of this virtuous woman was her devotion to the Lord. It trumps every other quality on the list. Charm is deceptive, and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised. The virtuous woman serves her family because she first serves God. She's strong for the task, no doubt a woman of valor, because she draws her strength from Him, from the Lord. This woman is no weak-willed doormat, so be careful about believing stereotypes that may portray her in that fashion. She is a mighty force whose vigilant devotion to God and family is picturesque. That devotion is packaged in many different types of women. She may be the woman at your church who makes a mean 7-layer dip for the church potluck, or the woman in your Bible study group who has multiple tattoos and piercings. She may be the woman who works full-time, or the woman who stays at home with her children. She may be a divorced woman who tackles single mom duties with a smile on her face, but with a burden in her heart. She may be the woman whose husband plucked his socks out of a color-coded sock drawer. She may be a woman whose husband heads out the door sporting pink undershirts under his Oxford and both blue and black socks under his trousers after he polishes off a plate of waffles toasted to golden crisp by none other than himself. Theoretically speaking, she says, of course, like he's really going to do that. So, I say all that to close out with this advice from Rachel. So, pastor, she said. Remember, pastors, they try and sometimes it just doesn't end up quite right. So when honestly, I try to elevate all women. All women have the potential. All women came from mothers. All women have a relationship, no matter how good or bad it is with their mother. All women have some level of motherly instinct. God created women in a very special and marvelous way. And when I'm here, behind this pulpit, I don't want to demean that at any level. in any way. Only acknowledge that women are women of value, great value. And they're also women of valor. And their crowning glory, their crowning virtue, is that they love the Lord. They fear the Lord with their whole heart. And that is what makes all the difference. So Rachel says, this is her advice to pastors, so it's an advice to me. Don't be afraid of looking to scriptural examples of strong and capable women. But be careful of focusing on marriage, motherhood, and domesticity when it is not our roles that define us. Notice she doesn't say we defy those roles. She says it's not our roles that define us, but the integrity and bravery we bring to those roles. You don't have to turn to Proverbs 31 to find a woman of valor. You can turn to Sarah, or Deborah, or Esther, or Mary Magdalene, or Mary of Bethany, or Mary of Nazareth, or Martha, or the Apostle Junia. Paul said, she's like a mother to me. To Priscilla, or Phoebe, or Tabitha too. And you can turn to the women of valor in your life who are bringing their unique gifts, insights, passions, and callings to bring hope and healing to the world. And if you would speak to Vicky, she might ask, and where does her strength come from? And the answer is God. And she lives to bring him honor. Her husband, if she has one, and her family too. Just being who God created her to be, June Cleaver or not. And so I tell you today, moms, women, you are indeed women of valor. Thank you for all that you do every day. You are beyond compare, so stop trying. Just don't forget that your strength and your beauty come from the Lord. So fear him. Wisdom would say, it's your crowning virtue. So, on this Mother's Day, you go, girl. You go, girl. You do what God has created you to do. And men, don't forget, you're the target audience. You can do more to elevate your wife than you realize. With all of the things that she faces, you need to elevate her. You need to let her know how you feel about her. So you don't know what's going on in her mind. I guarantee you that. Whether you're married 1 year or 34. Hey, guys, they change it up on you sometimes. But one thing is constant. She needs you for reassurance. That's wisdom as a husband. If you have to get your Bible out and read Proverbs 31 and about that woman, as if she is your wife, she will disagree with you, but do it anyway. And if she can't accept that, take time to notice all the things that she does every day and how she does them and the heart with which she performs her tasks. Because it's not the tasks. It's not the to-do list. Does she get everything done in a day? Does she do everything just like you like it? If you're the leader, you're the servant of your wife. Guys, I'm sorry. That's scriptural right there. You find out what she needs and you give it to her. And you let her know that what she does and who she is counts. Because there's a whole world of people out there that do nothing but compare. And you can't be one of them, guys. You can't be. Who are you going to compare her to? How do you think that'll go? Sign up for a marriage counseling class somewhere down the line because that's where you're headed. Hey, you probably didn't marry June Cleaver, but if you did, cool. But don't try to make her live up to some expectation that's unrealistic. Elevate the women in life. They are women of valor, and they have a crowning virtue. Christian women fear the Lord, and that's where her strength comes from. That's her compass. That's her guide. It may not always look like what you think, guys, it should, but who cares? You need to know what it looks like to her. And let her know what you really think about her in your heart, that you love her. Let me dial back on that. You may not want to always tell her what you think about her at the moment. But think about it. Take time to consider and watch. Observe. Be a student of your wife. Because she's greater than what you think. And when you tell her, if she doesn't agree with you, or if she dismisses it, so what? Tell her again. Who cares? Who cares? Because that's how you see her. Even if it's to convince yourself. Not lie to yourself, but even if it's just to convince yourself. Take the pressure off. My goodness, take the pressure off. You guys are partners. You know, I mentioned, I guess I've kind of deviated from the women's stuff here. You read earlier when a woman talked about being a helpmate. You know, that's a very strong word too, and it's mostly used in Scripture to describe what God does. He's a warrior who fights for his people. Guys, your wife fights for you. I charge you. You better fight for her. Fight for her. She doesn't feel like she has any valor of her own. When she doesn't feel like she has any virtue of her own, remind her that she does, because she fears the Lord. And start from there. So mothers everywhere, my mom, my mother-in-law, who exacted a meal out of Pam and I last night from Olive Garden. However, I was the beneficiary. I love you, ladies. And to my wife and my daughter and my other daughter. I looked at one daughter and said, and my daughter, and then I said, and my other daughter, and she's back there going. You are indeed women of valor. And you have great virtue that comes from God. Let it show. Let it show. And if I didn't have to mow the grass this week, I think I might have memorized those 22 verses. So I'll have to work on that myself. And all I can say is, to all you women here today, and you hear all those kids back there making noise. If for no other reason, happy Mother's Day, because you're in here and they're back there. Right? Stand with me if you would. No climactic ending, just the truth. When we look at Scripture for what it is, we can draw great strength from it and great truths that transcend what looks to be on the surface. And I think that's what these ladies have done in an effort to try to measure up. They've come to realize that's not what it's about. It's about fearing God and living life with integrity. So, I want to pray for all the women in this room today. Let's bow. Lord, I thank you for the gift of every female, every woman, every lady in this room and across this campus. And I pray, God, when they feel like they're not measuring up, remind them that their value is found in you and that they can still live with the integrity of their own heart intact. Their character can still be preserved because they do indeed fear you. And if they fear you, remind them that they have no problem serving their husbands because their husbands are already serving them. Bless these ladies, Lord, I pray, today. May their hearts be full of the truth of your word. May they love you, and may they live their life in such a way that their honor that's due them would be seen by everyone, not just their husband. And I pray for the target audience as well. I pray for every husband in this room to be a servant to his wife, to elevate her, to encourage her, to be right next to her, supporting her and helping her. And memorizing 22 verses to tell her how wonderful she really is. Because, Lord, that's wisdom in action.